So, welcome to episode 20. Yes, y'all, we are at episode 20 of the BLK ED podcast, where we explore the stories, the challenges, and triumphs of Black leaders in the nonprofit sector. Once again, I am your host, Jade Nicole Neverdon Merritt, and I am the founder and executive director of Black ED Network. And so today's episode is Mission in Motion, Leading with Purpose. And we are sitting down with an exceptional guest today, Derryck Fletcher, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Y in Central Maryland. The Y in Central Maryland is 100 million plus charitable organization serving more than 145,000 members. He leads the organization's work across multiple impact areas, including early childhood development, community schools, before and after school programs, summer camp, community health, food access, big brothers and big sisters at the Y, workforce development, college and career readiness, and Y family centers. He also oversees the Y's partnerships, advocacy, learning and development, talent, and social responsibility initiatives. Derryck is deeply engaged in the community beyond the Y. He hosts an award-winning Sunday morning gospel show on WEAA-FM, praise the Lord, Morgan State University's NPR affiliate, and Derryck also serves as an associate pastor at the Church of the Redeemed of the Lord. Derryck serves on several boards and coalitions for worthy causes. He and his wife are proud parents of 4 wonderful children. In this conversation, we'll unpack what it means to operationalize mission at scale, how leadership rooted in service can move entire communities, and what it takes to manage systems that are both human and high performing. So without further ado, let us get into Mission into Motion, Leading with Purpose with Derryck Fletcher. So welcome, Derryck, to
Thank you,
episode 20.
Jade. It's so good to
Thank
be with you.
Yes, it is a pleasure to sit down with you. I'm just really excited. I know you and I had the opportunity to connect last year, and I love how, we're bringing that conversation full circle, and you're serving as an amazing guest with us today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's my honor.
Thank you so much, Derryck. And so what we like to do on the BLK ED podcast, as we get started, many of us have different journeys and how we landed in this sector and doing the work that we do. Would you be able to share just a little background with our listeners today in terms of how you landed into this role as the Chief Operating Officer of the Y in Central Maryland?
Well, it's really interesting. I started my career really early in banking, of all places, and I was on this fast track working in banking, and I left banking abruptly because I spent my vacation working as a camp counselor at a week-long residential summer camp for high school student leaders. It was a camp that I attended as a young person, and I worked for them. And then when I started working at the bank while I was still in college, I decided to go back to work and leave because I remember calling my mom when I was leaving a week of camp. And I
Mhm.
said, I forgot what it was like to change lives.
Wow.
This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I left. I spent some time soul searching. I could afford to do that because I didn't have a wife or any kids or any real responsibilities.
I hear you.
And I went on this mission to find myself because I had peaked really early in life. And I
Mhm.
realized that this was the work that I was supposed to do. And so I shifted career paths and
Mhm.
I started working in youth development. My
Awesome.
particular focus was around supporting young student leaders. Eventually, that morphed into running after school programs and doing some community school work. I was the executive director at a small nonprofit here in Baltimore that no longer exists. It is not open anymore. I was actually the executive director that led the dissolution process for that organization, which was painful, but the right
Mm.
thing to do at the time. And it was during that process that I landed at the Y. I'll never forget what that experience was like. It
Mhm.
was December of 2012. Just had my youngest daughter. So we had 3 infants at home, but
Wow.
knew that God was like, it's time to transition the organization that I was leaving and to begin its sunset. And
Mhm.
so it was the December board meeting in 2012 that I asked the board to support a motion to begin the dissolution process for the organization. And it was
Mhm.
scary because I didn't have a job.
Mm.
We had 3 infants at home. We
Wow.
had been married for less than 2 years. Always say that Alexis and I couldn't figure out how to not get pregnant for the first couple of years of our marriage, and so we had 3 beautiful baby girls at home under the age of
Good.
1 at the time, and because we had 2. If people are trying to do the math, we had 2 at one time.
The twins,
Right.
okay.
We had the twins first, and then we had Courtney shortly thereafter, 11 months after that. And we began the dissolution process for the organization. I did not have a job, but I had faith, and I knew
Mm.
that I was being obedient to that still small voice. I was sitting at home one night, I was working, and I felt led to go to the Wise website. I did not
Mm.
have a real connection with the Y. I did not have a
Wow.
Y story beyond being the leader of a small nonprofit in the Wise catchment area and trying to get a partnership with the Y. Quite
Mhm.
honestly, was my and I was unsuccessful in trying to get that partnership. But that was my experience with the Y. But I landed on the Wise website. I applied for this job. They were looking for a leader for the before and after school enrichment division. I applied for the job. During the interview process, I had a really good conversation with the recruiter. I had a really good conversation with the hiring manager. Then I make it to the next round, and there was another executive who has since retired, but really respected an institution in the work. And she stopped the interview and she said, "You are not qualified for this job. I don't
Wow.
know why the hiring manager moved you along. It is a waste of both of our time, but
Mm.
wish you all the best." And that was the end of the interview.
Wow.
And she was adding voice to all of the negative self-talk that I
Mm.
had going into the interview. But I knew, right? Like it was divine, right? Like
Mhm.
I had no reason to go to the Wise website that night other than feeling led by God to do it. I had this incredible conversation with the recruiter. I had an incredible interview with the hiring manager. From the moment that I met with her, I knew that I was supposed to work for her. And then I get to this next interview and I hear that and I thought, I thought that I had bombed and it was over, but I knew that I was obedient. I was really surprised 24 hours later to get an invite to come back and meet with our CEO
Wow.
at the time.
Wow.
They offered me the job and then the rest is history. And
Wow.
so I've had the opportunity over the course of the last 12 years to really grow up here at the Y.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
and I started in that role running our before and after school enrichment programs. And over the course of 12 years, I think I've had something like 7 different roles here at the Y. And I've been our chief operating officer for 3 years now. There was
Mm.
a 6-month externship, as my CEO likes to call it, when
Okay.
I left the organization to go work for another organization here in the city, and I was recruited to come back to the Y. But it's been home.
Wow.
It's been where I've grown up and where I've had the pleasure and the honor of raising my family as well.
That is such a powerful story, Derrick. I think one of the things that I hear consistently of guests is being obedient, right? So you shared a story literally where you just felt a calling to just do something, right? To go on the WISE website and given you talked about kind of your experience in youth development and, feeling the call to be in the youth development space, but to go on that website and even despite oftentimes the naysayers or sometimes how folks can impress upon negative thoughts or ideas around what we are still called to do, to even get that call back in 24 hours. That is nothing but like just a testimony to, just like you said, operating in your divine purpose and what God is calling you to do and being obedient. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of folks, it's being obedience and, like you said, listening to that small voice that's telling you to do something. And so that is just an amazing story, an amazing story.
Yeah, I always say that God has ordered my steps and has blessed me beyond measure despite me. And
Yeah.
despite, all of the times that I've gotten in the way.
Mhm.
But listening being yielded to and listening to that still, sometimes small and quiet voice has never led me wrong.
No, I hear you because I know God with me sometimes. I know He'd be like, now here she go again. Didn't I tell her? And still, continuing to care for His children,
Mhm.
even though we kind of rear off or taking steps in our own path.
Yeah.
But He's always there. And so He's constant, and He's good all the time. And so that is such an amazing story. One of the pieces, as you were talking, about kind of your journey is kind of the dissolution of another organization. And here we are at a time where there has been so much transition just nationally with organizations, even locally, nonprofit organizations have been sunsetting. Can you talk a little bit about or encourage some of the folks that may feel like it's time to close and maybe move on to a next chapter? Because in my conversations with a lot of founders, particularly Black founders of nonprofit organizations, it's like your baby, right? And it's
Yeah.
kind of so hard to move on or transition from something that you've even built yourself from the ground up. So, could you share a word or encouragement about kind of what that process looked like for you and for folks that may be thinking about it, particularly in these times?
Yeah, well, I had an opportunity to lead a mission-driven organization. One that I did not found, was probably the fourth or fifth executive director of the organization. But I was certainly standing on the shoulders of
Mhm.
those that came before me. And we were at a strategic crossroad as an organization where we realized that we could not leverage economies of scale because we didn't have the scale. But in
Mm,
order to produce the scale, it would require us to think and behave differently than we had as an organization. And so the organization had already gone through an evolution from the vision of its initial founder.
mm,
And we then found ourselves at another strategic crossroad where it was either we are going to put our foot on the gas and we are
mm,
going to scale, which is going to look and feel really different for the organization and for the board, or we may have to actually take a little bit of a step back and just return back to that original vision, one where we knew finding sustainable sources of funding was going to be difficult.
mhm,
And there was some tension on the board. I had inherited a board of very committed board members, some of which had been on the board since close to the beginning. And they were very bought into and loyal to and committed to that original vision of the
mm,
organization's founder. Then there were other newer members of the board members that were candidly recruited by me that were like, we're here to scale, right? Like we
mhm,
see where this could go. And right, like there was tension between those two interests, both really pure and really integral,
mhm,
but just different. And so we finally reached a place where I instigated an honest conversation and said,
mhm,
we have corrected the debt that was owed. We have temporarily found a solution to our structural deficit, although
mhm,
it's not sustainable unless we either shrink or grow. And we're just at a strategic crossroad, and we are not aligned, right? Like as a
mhm,
board, we're not aligned. And what we should realize is that we have fulfilled the vision of Sister Claire, that was the founder
mhm,
of the organization. We have paid off all of our debt. And here's an opportunity now where we can begin to dissolve the organization, but do it in pride and do it
mhm,
in a way that honors the legacy and the vision of Sister Claire, one that protects the integrity of the organization. And if we begin this process now, we have 6 months to find new operating partners for every place where we are operating programming, so that those who are receiving the benefits of our programming don't experience any sort of disruption to
mm,
services. And I think what the board understood was I had already made a decision and
Mhm.
like, and just in bringing that recommendation that that's what I thought was best. And if they decided not to dissolve, that they would soon be leading a search for a new executive director. And so the board at that same meeting voted unanimously to allow me to take the next 6 months to go through the dissolution process.
Wow, wow. I think one thing that I think what you said was so important, and really kind of the piece about nonprofits that I feel often gets lost is that the mission and the vision of Sister Claire has been carried out, right? And so it's not the idea of nonprofits to stay around for hundreds of years, right? It's to very specifically meet your mission, right? And the goal
Mhm.
is to kind of serve the communities or provide some sort of resource that the community can function as itself and doesn't rely on the nonprofit. And so kudos to you and your leadership and just really identifying what that is. And one of the pieces that you mentioned also is the piece with the board, right? And we
Mhm.
know as executive directors that can be a challenge, particularly as you mentioned, you have board members who may have been brought on at the inception or the time of the organization who have been very committed over time. And then, a new ED comes in and there are new searches for board members. And so the dynamic shifts. Can you speak to a little bit how to navigate kind of as an executive director, some of those board dynamics that can often be challenging in our roles?
Yeah. So, one of the best pieces of advice that I was given from a former boss is, and this is where, growing up in a Black household, going to a HBCU comes in handy, is you got to think of it like a spades game.
Okay. Okay.
As you trying to, figure out who got what and, count
Okay.
cards in the deck, is you have to understand who's in what role. And the first thing that you've got to do as an executive director is figure out who the big and little joker are.
Okay.
And so the thing about the big and little joker is it's really interesting because it's technically not, one of the formal like cards in the trump suit, but it outranks or it overpowers the ace of spades, right? Like it is the chief trump, although it does not really dress like one.
Mm,
And that's true for most boards. The person or persons that are most influential on the board are probably not the ones with the positional power, right?
mhm,
And so it's like, yep, I see my board chair is the ace of spades, but who's the
mhm.
little joker and who's the big joker, right? Like that is the question. And you've got to figure out how you build alliances there with the folks who have the most influential power on your board.
I love that. I would have never thought about a spades analogy, but Derek, I'm going to use that one if you don't mind.
Go for it.
And if I have another conversation, I do a lot of kind of board development trainings, but I have never heard that analogy before. But you are correct. I think oftentimes the folks that hold the most influence in these dynamics are often not the big or the little joker. And so how do you form alliances and build relationships with the folks who have quite a bit of influence in these spaces? And so, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Sure, sure. But Jay, I think the most important thing is there may be some executive directors watching or listening today that are wrestling with the decision around dissolve or not dissolve, right? Like
Mhm,
leave or stay. Is I had to be delivered from pride, right?
mm,
Really is what it is pride. This whole idea that would suggest that dissolving the organization or leaving to move on to a new assignment is admitting to failure is
mm,
it's a lie. And it's a
mhm,
lie that is rooted in pride, right?
mm,
Like it is pride that would cause me to believe that my worth as an individual or that my value as a
mm,
leader is tied to the success of an organization. It is pride that would cause me to believe that the organization could only thrive in my hands and under
mm,
my leadership. It is pride that would cause me to believe that the mission is not going to be fulfilled, or that folks in the community are not going to receive the services, interventions, and support that they need unless I do it, because I am the only one that could do it, right? Like the
Mm.
government does not rest on my shoulders. Like that
Amen.
that ain't it. That ain't my job, right? Like that's not my work. And so what I had to accept through a lot of self-work is that my responsibility in leading this organization was to get it to this point, right? Like
Mm.
it is better than it was when it was placed in my hands,
Mhm.
financially, programmatically, strategically, right? Like it has evolved and it has grown. I have been a great steward of the organization
Mm.
during my time and tenure and leading it. And what is clear is that my assignment is nearing its end. And ultimately, the decision that the board made was that the organization's assignment was also nearing its end.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is so powerful. You hit on so many, key things, and just in terms of how pride oftentimes influences. And like you said, the organization will continue to be effective and continue to run whether I am leading this organization or not. And I think that is great advice. And I'll carry that with me, because I think really more so in the beginning of my journey, and it can kind of creep in there
Mhm.
sometimes, this founder syndrome, right? And that the organization cannot run or function if I am not present. And we look at organizations like, Johns Hopkins. I always give this example. This is 100-year-old organization created off the idea of, one person or a very small group of individuals, and how it continues to run and not just serve folks as we know it because it's such, a landmark here in Baltimore, but also how it serves families globally, right? And so that cannot be just based upon just one person, that's many. And so I thank you for sharing that, because that speaks to me also, right? Like the organization is supposed to run, it's supposed to be successful, even after a founder may leave, or an executive director or whatever. And so I think that is very powerful, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to free ourselves from this need to be all things to all people, right? Like,
Mhm.
part of what I realized for me is that part of the way my internalized oppression was
Mhm.
showing up was me believing that I had to constantly prove that I
Mm.
am valuable, constantly prove that I am a good leader, constantly prove that I am enough. In the way that I had to prove that was through my work by saving this organization. And
Mm.
that was never my assignment.
Mm. That's powerful. Understanding what our assignments are, right? And being very clear, because you talk about kind of your value is not placed, and we know that in serving the Y of Central Maryland, like I mentioned in your bio, it's 100+ $1 million organization. You have hundreds of thousands of members. How do you lead with purpose in that, right? Kind of like you just kind of talking about understanding kind of sometimes the weight or the responsibility that we carry just by naming things, right?
Mhm.
Budget or the people that you serve. How do you lead or lean into the way that you lead, given the weight of carrying this organization?
Yeah. So I think that clarity is really important, and finding time, making time, because
Mhm.
time can't be found. It's like carving out that time, holding the time as sacred, because you really can't make time either. So it's
Right.
really right, like establishing as a priority time to be thoughtful and to create clarity, and to do that first personally, because it starts with self-work, right? Like before
Mhm.
you can lead an organization, you got to learn how to lead a team. Before you
Mhm.
can lead a team, you have to learn how to lead yourself. And so beginning with that self-work, first getting some clarity around what I believe my purpose is in the earth. Why am
Mhm.
I here? One of the things that my therapist helped me to realize and fully lean into is that I don't need to have multiple personas, right? Like I believe that I
Mm,
needed to show up in one way at work, and I needed to show up in another way at home, and I needed to show up at another way in ministry, then I need to show up in another way, right? Like in
mm,
my radio and broadcasting career. And it's like, no, like when God created you, he created all of you, and
mm.
his intent was for you to be who he made you to be every place he sends you to be.
Come on
And
now.
that bent my brain a little
Mm,
bit, but it was also liberating, and it
mm,
gave me the space to really be clear and to be unapologetic about who I am and who I'm supposed to be in every place where he sends me. And right, like that also took me down the path of like some serious self-reflection, and where I realized that I had inadvertently perpetuated harm trying
mm.
to be somebody who I'm not supposed to be in certain places, because
Oh,
I was just trying to figure out how to survive, not realizing that all I needed to do was just be me.
mm,
So it first begins with, right, like personal clarity, and it shows up in, what are my personal values, what are my non-negotiables as it relates to what I expect, what I will tolerate, what I will not tolerate in any
mhm,
space that I occupy, from the organization, from my leadership, from my colleagues, from my team, right? Like
mhm,
all of those things. And then once we're clear there, and I'm clear that I'm in a place that's aligned with my personal why, I then have a responsibility as a leader of this organization to ensure that we have organizational clarity. And
mhm,
so for us, that organizational clarity is really provided in our strategic plan. Our strategic plan, much it's to our CEO's credit, is not something that we do and then it sits on the shelf. It
right.
really guides our work, and it becomes our organization's North Star during the
Mhm,
strategic period. And then my job is to make sure that we achieve all of our big, hairy, audacious goals that are called out in that strategic plan, as accomplished through the success measurements and metrics that we have there. And the way in which we do that is by being laser focused on what we say our priorities are.
mhm,
And the way that I ensure, it's my job to ensure that we remain laser focused on those priorities by not becoming distracted.
mm,
So the decisions that I make around what we will do are just as important as the decisions I make around what we won't do,
okay.
realizing that there's not only a direct cost, but there's an opportunity cost to every decision that we make, right? Like there is something that we're not going to be able to do as a result of our decision to do a thing. And
Mhm,
so every decision that comes across my desk, whether it's to make a purchase, to realign something, to launch a new program, to sunset a program, to hire for a new role. It's, how does this align with our strategic plan? How does this keep us on track for achieving our strategy?
love that. And so, as we're kind of talking about like programs and kind of what makes sense and what aligns, we know that the why extends into neighborhoods and schools and family centers. And so,
Do all the
how
things. We
all
do
the
everything but hair.
all, and that's absolutely amazing. And so, when you talk about alignment, how do you ensure that the programs remain grounded in some of the local needs? And when we're, talking, about kind of in Central Maryland, particularly even in, cities like Baltimore, in
Mhm.
your role, how do you ensure local needs are being met?
Yeah, one of the things that I struggled with as I've been on this journey of self work and growth
Mhm,
and development and all of the things is the fact that I work for a large organization that is a legacy anchor institution
mhm,
whose history, um, truthfully says that, back in the 1800s when the organization began, it was with the express intent to exclude people that look like you and me, right? Like
right.
that's something that I'm aware of. It
Mhm,
is something that I take personally.
mhm,
And our organization is committed, as I have a personal commitment, to undoing and disrupting that
mm,
legacy in every place where it's been perpetuated.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, we had to have some real honest conversations about our work in one particular community because our organization, when we really began to grow and scale the organization, we did that by leveraging scale. And quite honestly, we centered where there was lowest hanging fruit in terms of a financial ROI. That was how we were able to grow the organization and ultimately do like really good things because we were growing the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did was actually unintentionally perpetuate the disinvestment, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in certain communities. And so the one of my former colleagues, who she actually preceded me as our chief strategy officer, took on the responsibility of figuring out how we center this particular community and how we reimagine our work in the community because the data suggested that we need
Mm-hmm.
to. And one of the things that she was adamant about was that we needed to first go on a listening tour, and we
Okay.
need to go and listen to everybody from the community. And so we did that. She called it the Ruben Studdard I'm Sorry for 2004 tour. We talked
That's
to everybody.
hilarious.
We talked to us, right? Like every business owner in the community, every school leader, every neighborhood uh, person, like leader or influencer, and that includes, right, like the folks from the homeowners association,
Yeah.
well as just the OG folks in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody got the unofficial mayor of their block.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't go through them. We talked to literally everybody. And what we found was that, one, we were doing a really poor job of listening to the community. We were
Mm-hmm.
doing a poor job of following the community's lead. And we had really taken on a mentality of colonizers, right? Like we believe
Mm-hmm.
we knew better. And the reality was nothing could be further from the truth. And so one of the things that one of the shifts that we have made since then is we don't make plans for a community without the community at the table. We don't know what's best for the community. We see ourselves not as a guest in the community. We are a part of the community, but it's an honor to be a part of the community. We see every space that we occupy in the community as sacred ground, whether it's a Y Family Center, whether it's as a community school lead agency, whether we are running a Head Start program or a preschool in that community, right? Like it's sacred ground and it belongs to the community. And our responsibility is to be an effective steward of that community. So while we do have some basic tenets and we do have an organizational strategy that drives our work, because obviously one of the wise superpower is its scale. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we look for those economies of scale and where we can leverage them, but we've realized that what we can't do is force a square peg in a round hole.
Okay.
That's not what the community needs, and that's not what the community deserves.
I love that. I think one of the biggest mistakes organizations can make is not really identifying what the community needs are. I think we speak from positions of power or influence, and not really understanding the impact of the community and the voice, right? And you said, honoring that, right? And that's a sacred part of how the organization runs is really through understanding what the community needs are. You talk about just kind of the scale, right, of the why, right? So it's not just kind of the, before and after school programs, but we also talk about like workforce development, health, obviously the youth development. How do you identify? And I want to kind of shift a little into kind of like this funding piece, right? Because I think that's always a big conversation anytime you sit down with an executive director and, obviously not being lost on me the times that we're in and
Yeah.
how lack of funding is impacting nonprofit organizations in particular. So can you talk a little bit about how you prioritize funding opportunities across so many impact areas, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is disavow folks from the notion that we don't have to worry about money because we have it.
Mhm.
when the reality is more money, more problems, right? Like,
Yeah.
we grow as an organization, but if you look at our 990, our margins are not thick, right? Like we
Okay.
have incredibly thin margins because we generate every dollar, almost
Mhm.
down to the penny
Okay.
of our work back into our mission. And so, at our peak season, we have more than 3,000 associates
Wow.
that we have to make sure we pay every other
Mhm.
week. And the wage inflation
Mhm.
that we are seeing is unprecedented, right? Like, I want to
Yeah.
be clear that we're not paying folks enough because, I think that folks should be able to provide for their families when they
Absolutely.
work full time. That is that's a strong belief.
Mhm.
What is also a strong reality is we have to find a way to beat the market demands,
Mhm.
so that we can be an employer of choice, so that we can continue to provide services to the community while remaining in the black, and
Yeah.
while not pricing ourselves out of the market for the social enterprise portion of our organization,
Mhm.
where the public pays some portion, and certainly not pricing ourselves out of the market for the portions of our work that are completely grant funded. It is a constant chess game. It is a constant balancing act. It's never done. Um,
Mhm.
you never feel like you have enough, regardless of
Mhm.
the size of your organization. You
Right.
never feel like you have enough. So, to every executive director who is watching or listening to us today, um, regardless of the size of your organization, I'm here to say, me too. Um,
Okay. Me too.
I feel your pain, and know that
Yeah.
it doesn't. Some things get easier, and some things are a little less challenging to figure out when you have scale, but the problem does not go away. As it relates to how we make decisions about funding, one of the other great things about working for the Y is that sometimes some opportunities do come your way. There
Mhm.
is this notion, right, like that we don't need the support because we're big. Again,
Mhm.
right, like, also not true, because we
Right.
just have more associates that we got to pay, more
Mhm.
programs that we have to run, a bigger budget that we have to figure out how we balance, and so every philanthropic dollar really does count. And so sometimes it can be difficult to say no to a decision.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
what I have learned, what we have found, is that saying yes to the wrong funding decision
Mhm.
could be catastrophic. It
Yeah.
will cost you more than the funding that you will bring in. And
Mm.
so we actually have a go, no go decision tree,
Okay.
that we go down before we do a decision. Before we move forward with the funding decision, we have to first answer, like, is this work we're already doing, or
Mm.
is this additional work? If it
Yeah.
is additional work, does it align with our strategy? Does it
'Cause
align
that
with our
mission creep is real.
It is
Mhm.
real. And so, and leaders have to justify and explain how this new work aligns with it. Um,
Yeah.
is this source of funding, if it is new work, is it going to fully fund the new work that we have to do? And not just direct costs, but indirect costs as well. Does it fully fund all of the all of the costs that we incur from having to do this? Then we are also really thoughtful and explicit around what is the opportunity cost? What are we going to not be able to do if we move forward with this funding decision? Is it a multi-year
Mm.
funding commitment from the funder?
Mhm.
Because it's really difficult to start doing a thing that you're not going to be able to sustain, because
Absolutely.
then you got to sunset an initiative,
Yep.
and that also often means that you got to sunset people.
Yes.
And that's really problematic as well. And then finally, is it in our wheelhouse? Like,
Okay.
are we the right people to do it?
Mhm.
Is this our space? Is this our lane? And if the answer is yes, is it work that we should be doing alone, or is it work that we really should be doing in partnership with other folks? And then finally, does the community want us to do this work here and in this space?
Mhm.
Because if they don't, they ain't coming.
You said they ain't coming. No, you're right. Does the community do they want to see this work? One of the pieces that you mentioned was around like partners, right? And so I'm sure the Y has tons of community partners. And so when you're thinking about collaborations and partners, what are some of the pieces that you consider when how you're engaging with community partners or collaborators for the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the ways that we have learned to intentionally be advocates and tools of equity.
Mhm.
Because we have scale, because we have a broad scope, there are sources of funding that we are better equipped to manage, but there's no need for us to do it alone,
Mhm.
particularly if there are like-minded organizations whose values align with ours, who may be smaller in their scope and scale, but they are deeply rooted in that particular community. Their leadership and their team represents that community,
Love
right? Like
that.
there's no reason why we can't do this work together, right? Like and share some of that funding. And so we're really intentional about doing that work. That's we do that a lot in our grant funded after school programs.
Mhm.
A lot of the enrichment partners that we'll bring in to the organization are from smaller, more grassroots organizations. We are also doing that with a number of funded coalitions
Awesome.
that we currently lead. We receive funding from the Quest Foundation to fund a health equity coalition for the Druid Hill community. And so a large majority of that funding is actually re-granted out to our partners who are engaged in that work. Similarly, we
That's
are one
great.
of the quarterback agencies for Governor Moore's Enough initiative, where
Mhm.
we're building a coalition for our place-based strategy in the Waverly community that centers the Weinberg Y and Waverly.
Awesome.
Same thing, right? Like, in a good amount of that grant, right? Like, is re-granted to
Mhm.
our partners who are on that steering committee. And so it's what we do. We look for organizations whose mission and values align with ours, who
Mhm.
align with ours, right? Like, is not duplicative of our
Mm.
work, but like
Okay.
there is alignment there. And there's a particular interest and emphasis on partnering with organizations that are smaller and that are directly representative of the communities that we're serving.
Absolutely love that. I love that. Just kind of this idea of these coalitions. I think that is truly impactful work, and I think that is something that I would love to even learn more about and how it's connected with the work that you do. I think
Yeah.
that's absolutely amazing, Derek. This is a great conversation. I knew when I came into this, I was like, we're gonna have a good conversation today. But as our time is winding down, I do like to take a bit of a opportunity to
Mhm.
just allow our guests to share anything just kind of about your journey. I mean, I have some highlights that I can pull in your testimony from where you are now, but is there anything that you can say, like, I am just super proud of, kind of, where I am, this work that I'm doing? Is it anything that's just kind of deeply meaningful to you that you could share to our listeners as encouragement? I shared with you kind of before we got started today. Oftentimes, as Black leaders, and I was talking to someone actually last month, and they were saying, I feel embarrassed when I talk about what I do as a leader. Like, and it was like within the last year, they just started to feel confident about sharing, their work and using it as a humbling experience. And so, is there anything that you want to share with our listeners that you're incredibly proud of or that has been deeply meaningful to you in
Yeah,
your journey?
I would say what's local and immediate for me right now is my family. I'm so proud to be a husband and a dad, right? Like, God has blessed me with an amazing partner who my wife just, she's a rock star and allows me to do all the things. And I always joke and say that my kids are the reason why I have to work. um,
Mm,
I choose to do this work because it's aligned with my mission and my passion, but I got to go to work because they are accustomed to their lifestyles, and it's operation, please don't put me in a nursing home.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes for work, we got to travel a whole lot. And
Mhm.
the month of October was just crazy travel for me. And I came home from my last work trip for the month, and my kids were like, "We are so glad you're home, and we're so glad you don't have to travel for a while." And I was like, that is why we do this, right? Like
Mhm.
it's for our kids. And so, the work is great, and the awards and the accolades and the validation and for all of the work, like, yep, that's fine. But it's really for those folks who live at home for me. Like, they're my first priority. I always say they're my first ministry. And I
Mm.
mean, and so, my wife surprised me the other day and put this post on, it was either Facebook or Instagram, I can't remember. It completely caught me off guard, and it made me blush and smile. But
Mm.
it was just like one of those, like, I see you posts, and like, thank
Mhm.
you for what you do for us and your family. So like that's what I'm most proud of, is
Okay.
that my wife feels seen and loved and cared for and protected, that my kids feel psychologically safe, and that they are thriving in life, and figuring out how to navigate this world. At the end of it all, when I die, right? Like, I don't want my tombstone to say he was a great boss, he was a good leader, he was
Mm.
a heck of a COO. Like, that doesn't matter. I wanted to say that I was a good husband, that I was a loving husband, that I was a doting dad, right? Like,
Mhm.
this title at work, what you see right down there at the bottom, like, that's rented, right? Like,
Mhm.
I
Mm.
that title is rented. I have a lease agreement on that title, but I've got the deed to my name. And
Amen.
that legacy is what gets passed on to my kids. And so that's what's most important for me.
That is absolutely beautiful. And to you, Mrs. Fletcher, that's a good man, Savannah. Okay, that's a good man, Savannah.
But tell her, just keep coming home.
That is absolutely beautiful. I think you're absolutely right, Derek. You nailed it. I think even kind of my journey in becoming a new mom, baby boy just turned 2. And I think that puts a lot of things in perspective. What you said, kind of these titles, which is really resonating with me, they're on lease, right?
Mhm.
And so these are just temporary. Everything in this life is really temporary, but how do we cultivate and show up and love on and dote on, these kind of little people and family members who are going to carry the legacy, even after we are gone. And so that was just absolutely beautiful. And I thank you for just your transparency and vulnerability and sharing that, because I think we talk so much about the work, but what the work is truly impacting, and that's our family and
Yeah.
what we go to home to at the end of the day. And so I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Love your family, y'all. Love them. Because it's like, even on our worst days, right? Like, when we really fumble the ball, the fact that I'm blessed to go home to a group of people that will love me and still think I'm a superhero is just
Yeah.
amazing. And they also will humble me, right? Like, we don't care about the award. Like, it's
Yeah.
tomorrow's trash day, right? Like,
Yeah.
take the trash cans to the end of the driveway.
Yes, yes. Daddy duties. Well, even though this is just on lease, I would still love to hear just any new initiatives that are coming up with the Y in Central Maryland, and how some of our listeners, or as you mentioned, maybe some of those grassroots leaders who are doing the work and could serve as potential community partners. Anything that's on the horizon for the Y in Central Maryland, in ways that our listeners can engage with you.
Sure. So we actually just extended our strategic plan. It was just approved by our board in our
Mm.
October board meeting to extend our current strategic plan for 2 additional years. And so we've updated our success measurements, and we've gotten a little more refined in our areas of focus. So we're really excited about that. Our 4 areas of priority are really driving home the value, the social value of Y membership, and what that means in terms of finding community and well-being for all folks who engage with the Y across all of our points of access. by continuing to grow as an organization by investing in our core assets, being really clear about who we are and who we are not, what we do, what we don't do. The third one is about becoming the go-to workplace to make change and thrive. It is no secret, right? Like that our membership, our customer base expands 7 generations. We employ 5 of those 7 generations. So it looks really different, really complicated, really dynamic,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to meet all of those needs and expectations. And what we found is that folks have figured out how to not work a traditional 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be a destination as an employer because AI can only take us so far in the industries in which we operate. And then our fourth area of focus is about continuing to evolve our business model
Mm-hmm.
so that we are sustainable well into the future. So I'm excited about that. Areas of work that are just continuing to grow and blossom in our organization are really around our community health work. The work has really evolved and it's really beginning to mushroom. I am blessed with wonderful colleagues to help lead and shepherd that work. Our youth development work is continuing to evolve as well. And we are also like really essentializing our work with young men. The data is so clear and alarming around how we got a problem in this country around young men, around boys and young men, around some deficits in social emotional learning, around like clear gaps in terms of achievement across the age spectrum for boys and young men. And it's one of those things where it's like we got to do something about this. When you isolate boys and young men of color, particularly Black and brown boys, it is especially concerning and alarming. And so we're doing some really good work there around essentializing that work. And we look forward to sharing some of that really soon, and including scaling the work.
I absolutely love that. And I will definitely be looking out for more of the work. Derryck, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today and having you on as our guest. I know I'll be taking quite a few nuggets with me today from our conversation. And so I just want to say thank you, Derryck
Thank you,
Fletcher.
Jade. Thank you. And thank you to the Black ED Network. I so appreciate the work y'all are doing. It is so critically important because it is hard out there for all leaders of nonprofits or charitable organizations. It's especially hard for
Yeah.
folks who are in bodies or who come from communities that have been historically and intentionally marginalized. So you providing this space, like holding space for us to have community is so important. So like y'all keep up the good work.
Thank you. And thank you for your support, Derryck. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow the Derryck Black ED podcast on Spotify and YouTube. And join us next month, y'all. We're in and out the year, episode 21 with Franklin Baker, where we will continue exploring the stories of Black nonprofit leaders shaping systems for equity and change. And so until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you.